Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 38 of the Superhero Ethics Podcast. I'm Jacob Malichich, one of your hosts, and today we're going to be talking about something that is a passion of mine. We're going to be talking about a particular aspect of it, which is the story of Magic the Gathering. We have a very special guest joining us today, Lee Henderson. Lee, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. It's a pretty good day for a Monday.
Cool. And then, as always, we have our very own Matthew Westfox joining us today. Matthew, how's it going with you?
Pretty good. Thanks, Jacob. I'm glad you're taking the lead on this, and Lee, I'm really excited to have you with us. And I'm really excited to dive into this topic because this is one that I think is going to be really interesting to our listeners. As Jacob mentioned, we're talking today about Magic the Gathering, about that story, and particularly about a couple of aspects from that story. And it's one that is really important for both me and Jacob and Lee, as we are all judges in the Magic the Gathering program. But I think it's really important that what we're going to be talking about are some themes that come up in those stories that can be seen across a number of the stories in science fiction and fantasy and things like that. So I hope this is going to be a great show for our fans who love Magic the Gathering. I think it's great for the people who like the game but have never really heard about the story. And even for those of you who have no idea what we're talking about in terms of Magic the Gathering, we're going to be talking about sort of archetypes and story ideas that come up in Magic, but also come up in a lot of other stories, and diving into some of the ways those stories can be really helpful and some of the ways they can be problematic.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you going into that, Matthew, because in a lot of ways I feel like people who aren't into the game, who don't know the story, can still benefit from some of the things we're going to talk about because they are pretty universal. They're recurring themes in science fiction and fantasy, particularly in our culture. So, for those who don't know, and I'm actually going to throw this one to Lee, if you wouldn't mind, could you explain to us what the Gatewatch is? What is this entity that we're talking about, that we're focusing this show on, this part of the Magic story?
So the Gatewatch is a group of characters from the Magic. I hesitate to call it the Magic Cinematic Universe, but that really is one of the better comparisons. It is a.
We do have a movie coming, whether for good or bad.
I know. I don't know whether or not that is good or bad, but it is a group of. I believe it started out as 5 or so individuals that, around the time of Battle for Zendikar.
Correct.
Zendikar was being sacked left and right by the Eldrazi, and a group of planeswalkers, the kind of mythical entities, I desperately am reaching for something that would make better sense for that. A group of people that have, the superpower of being able to walk between planes of existence, form and say, for the sake of various virtues, I will keep watch. It starts out in the beginning, I believe, with Jace, Beleren, Nissa Ravain, Gideon, Jura, and eventually Chandra Nalar joins them, Liliana Vess, Ajani Goldmane, all whom have joined and now have formed this group for the betterment of the multiverse is more or less what their goal is. Now each character has their own motivations and their own kind of goals within what they do. Gideon is your true blue Boy Scout. He's all muscle, all here to help. He's the closest comparison would obviously be Captain America in my mind,
Right.
Because he can do no wrong and the law is just, and the law is always upheld, and Aunt May, apple pie, so on. But
and I think what's most relevant for our story here is that part of what happens in the Magic the Gathering sort of overarching story is that every couple of months the story goes to every a couple of times a year the story moves to a new plane of existence, and then we are told a new set of stories generally about the characters in that new plane of existence.
Yeah.
And that there have always been these characters called planeswalkers that can move back and forth and thus sometimes pop in and out of those stories. With the Gatewatch, which came up a couple of years ago, we now have sort of one central set of main characters for the overall story who keep going, like every time we, the audience, goes to a new plane of existence, they go to that new plane of existence and become the sort of central focus in that new plane.
Right. Do you think it would be fair, and this is for either of you, would be fair to sort of shorthand refer to them as an extra plane or Justice League.
Exactly. I, I, com-
Yeah.
I think that's pretty safe to say, considering that one of the nicknames that came out back when it was starting to form was literally the Justice
This,
League.
yes,
Right.
correct, and that has to do with one of the characters who, in that case, would be the titular character of the group, but is not actually being Jace. Jace
Yeah.
being, how do I put this without throwing my inherent bias in? Jace is, I feel, in a lot of ways, presented to me as me, as like my personal self-insert into the Magic story.
Right.
Only it's me when I was a very emotionally unstable teenager, that had a little bit too much appreciation for his own intelligence and not enough appreciation for the experiences of others. So, how do you guys feel?
So I'm glad you actually bring that up, because
I would actually say,
Go ahead.
do we want to really go into the Gatewatch first and then go into Jace?
Sure,
that's
that's
what I was
probably
gonna
fair.
say.
That's probably fair.
So yeah, no, we can definitely touch on Jace later, and Jace is a very interesting character when you actually sit and break him down, but we'll get to that
Right.
in a little bit, like you said. But so the other key thing with Magic, for those who maybe don't play, is that there are 5 colors of mana in the game. We're going to simplify that. I know your judge senses are tingling, but calm down. So there are 5 colors. There is white, there is blue, there is black, there is red, there is green. Each one tends to typify its own kind of emotions or key thoughts and stuff like that. White is associated with law and order, but also with protection. Blue is associated with intelligence and control. Black, ambition and greater power. Red, red-hot emotion and passion. And green is typically respect for the wild and producing 3 force for 2 mana. So, anyways, those are, and each of the characters kind of in the Gatewatch is kind of a sounding board for those things. A couple of the Planeswalkers have had kind of touches into other colors, like most recently in the Magic set Amonkhet, we saw Nissa obtain a blue identity and kind of develop that aspect of her, and previously Johnny went from being a traditionally mono white to being green white
Right.
more recently.
Well,
and I think what's relevant for this discussion is that so you have in this group of characters very much like the Justice League or the Avengers or some of these other team ups we've seen. The idea is that each of these characters has a really sort of particular personality focus,
Yes.
and that each of them can do some great things, but also be problematic, but that they all kind of balance each other out.
Right.
Yes.
So the Gideon character, the white character, brings sort of the organizational aspect, the idea of teaming up. He's really big into that, and but he also brings the idea of there being some kind of central right and some kind of need for action.
Right.
Jace, of course, being the blue representative, brings, well, his big beautiful brain, but honestly also a sort of level-headed approach, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So like if I'm gonna mix a whole bunch of different properties into this, but he's kind of like the Commander Data to Gideon's Riker, because I don't want to actually compare Gideon to Picard.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be a bit much. So,
Yeah.
you know, to kind of explain a little bit. So, when the Magic Set Oath of the Gatewatch came out after Battle for Zendikar, they all took an oath, and each card has its own, kind of flavor text of, for this reason I will keep watch. Gideon's is for justice and peace, I will keep watch. Jace is for the sake of the multiverse, I will keep watch, and it goes on and on. So each one really does kind of, and of course Liliana, with the eternal sass that she has, says, "Fine, I'll keep watch. Are you happy now?"
Yeah.
Right.
So
what do you guys think is the in terms of this idea of the Gatewatch as a part of the story? What's the positive about it? How does having this Gatewatch help the story? I know we certainly have some concerns about it, but let's start with the positive.
Well, it one of the things it does that I think people maybe don't give enough credit to is it gives us a centralized focus. It gives us some perspective characters that we you can sort of latch on to if you're into one of them, if one of them strikes you, like I'm particularly fond of Chandra, so if one of them strikes you in a particular way, you know that character's going to be around, it's something you can connect with, and as they're interacting with the story, you get to sort of experience it through their eyes.
Yeah.
So I think that's a benefit.
I'm going to go, obviously, in the other direction, and I'm going to go with the more concrete example of I like not being devoured by cosmic space monstrosities. It's one of those, especially once we get to the plane of Innistrad, where Jace goes about investigacing everywhere. He's trying to figure out what's going on, and there are obviously some odd things afoot, and he eventually runs into the Planeswalker Tamio. It's one of those, they end up realizing that, oh, the thing we were trying to stop on Zendikar is here, and we're trying to now stop it. And they have the ability to intervene, whereas the citizens of Innistrad maybe don't, because they're also, some of them are even found to be in thrall of what the madness is that's kind of going around. So it's one of those, they kind of have the means and the abilities to go, wait, we have dealt with this before, we can do something about it. And it's been found that it's generally been very effective. They've gone to a couple planes now and have like a 50% win record on doing good. We'll get it.
Hey, that's not bad. They're batting 500. That is not bad.
Like the Justice League or the Avengers, they exist because these universes need them, in theory.
Right. And I mean, that they formed in order to fight these cosmic beings that just devour entire planes of existence because it's their sustenance. Like, this is like, they were like, well, that's bad for us, for the denizens of those planes, so I guess we have to do something about it. Not quite their formation, but what's interesting is that they start out that way. Do we have any? But before I go on, because this goes into the concerns about the Gatewatch, but do we have any more things that we think are positive aspects of?
I will add one positive, and I know that's much to the surprise of some who know me on this topic, because I'm certainly going to have a lot to say about the negatives. But I do think one positive is, as we were talking before, each of these characters, I think there's an extent to which, even though each of these characters is phenomenally powerful, probably none of them would be able to be anywhere near as effective on their own. Not just because 5 superhuman beings are better than one, but because, as we were saying before, each of them, has a very particular focus that has some really great things, but also has some limitations. And that's somewhat of a story cliche, to be sure, but I think it's a very good one of this story is a really good way of demonstrating the power of that part of teamwork. And teamwork becomes really a cliche again, but I think there is a really powerful idea of, any one person who has strengths, that person, there's also some things they don't have, and that no one person can be everything, and that there's real value to figuring out what your strengths are and also figuring out where you're lacking and finding other people who can complement that in ways that I think the Gatewatch does really well.
The concept of none of us is as strong as all of us being kind of what gets emphasized.
Right. That's a really good thought. This exists actually in a lot of superhero team media, and I agree with you. I like that when the emphasis is more on here's a collection of individuals, each of which is very, very potent in some way in their own right, but there's holes in them personally that then get filled in by others, and they're again stronger together. And that idea of them by our powers combined we are Captain Multiverse sounds really funny, but at the same time it's this idea that when you work together with people toward a common goal, it's better than trying to go it on your own, better than trying to be the lone wolf. And that's a good positive message to be sending to any community, much less a community like Magic the Gathering players. Although we kind of get that message in outside of the Magic story these days as well, with the emphasis on pro teams, but we're not going to deep dive on that.
And I will just say on that level as well, this is something to be sort of a recurring story throughout this, is that the player base of Magic the Gathering hits all ages. But there's certainly a lot of youth who play these games. And I think that Magic is fairly intentional about the idea that, and tell me if you guys would agree with this, I think when analyzing the Magic stories, it's fair to think of them as the equivalent of YA novels, in that they're written to be written for all ages, but they are written very much knowing that a young adult audience is going to be some of the primary consumers. Do
Yes.
you think that's accurate?
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's not. It's certainly not heavy fiction by any stretch, and that's not. By the way, that is not meant as an indictment or an admonishment of the Magic story. I actually feel, especially more recently, it's been very enjoyable, very very well written, but it's not written to the level as to lose an audience that's perhaps a bit younger.
I mean, I would say both Harry Potter and Hunger Games were very much YA novels as well, and were some of the best fantasy or sci-fi I've read recently. So yeah, I don't think it's an indictment at all. I just think it's helpful to understand, particularly in this idea of teaching not only that teamwork, but that idea that each one of us has our own sort of special gifts that someone else doesn't have. And that when someone else is better at us than something, we can still be better at them than something else and complement each other. I think it's a great point for anyone, but especially for youth.
It preaches a message of embracing diversity, because that in doing that we are better, and that's something that we like promoting. Over here at Superhero Ethics, we promote diversity
Yes.
in cultures and among peoples. So
Okay, if I may for a moment, I'm merely recognizing that obviously Hasbro makes Magic the Gathering, and when reading off that entirety of like the traits and attributes and all the good things about it, I just kept going, wow, this sounds a lot like My Little Pony.
Yeah.
But I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's in and of itself, that's all a great thing, and it's been a great story. But anyways, let's knuckle down and start. Go ahead.
People have often made the joke, the Gatewatch friendship is magic. I mean, it's a very similar dynamic in that regard.
in this case, it's magic is friendship. Anyway, so let's go on to
let's get down to diligently ruining things for the Gatewatch.
Right. So where we wanted to talk about the Gatewatch specifically, and as is often the case on the show, we like to talk about things we feel are problems in the media we are being given, that we are consuming, and we've got some concerns with the Gatewatch. So what are some concerns we have? What are we worried about with this? What have we seen in the story that makes us go, I don't know.
Well, Lee, I know as we were getting ready for this, I once heard you say the phrase that the Gatewatch needs a prime directive. Can you say more about that?
Dear heavens, do they? They are... So, my biggest problem with the Gatewatch in its current state is... So, it's great. It's great that you want to help. It's great that you actually want to interact and you actually want to, help. But you need to set some amount of limits on it. One of the most common things that I think the modern sci-fi world has adapted from Star Trek, great series, is the concept of a prime directive. Do not interact with a certain planet or a certain species, unless you absolutely have to intervene. And
right.
Please correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a bit since I've actually brushed up on that, but it's this concept of we do not intervene unless we absolutely need to.
The Star Trek Prime Directive is there to say we're not here to enforce our ideals, our philosophies, our morality on other civilizations.
Right.
When we're involved with something, we'll do it, but particularly if a civilization is less developed, which comes up in Star Trek because they're, exploring different planets at varying stages in their development, they want to make sure they don't alter that. They don't want to change the course of that civilization's history. And of course, because it's a TV show, often that ends up happening, and they're like, well, crap, now what do we do?
Right.
through no fault of their own, now what do we do? Or another show recently that, interestingly, is brand new, still has this idea, The Orville, also has something like this, came up in a recent episode, where they don't want to influence a culture by being like, by the way, aliens exist. People outside of your world exist.
And I think there's two real key points here that we've hit on, but I want to make sure kind of elucidated. Is one is this idea of sort of the not basically shattering myths and not leaping people's science forward thousands of years before they're ready, and introducing them this whole wider world before they have any context for it. But the second, and Jacob, you were just saying this, I think is so important, is it's the not imposing on a totally different culture the values of our own culture, and that and there's a sort of recognition of there may be things that we can universally agree on are are problematic, and if we see happening in another world, we might want to intervene, but that a lot of times we have to stop and ask ourselves, wait a minute, even though by our values this society is broken, if by their own internal values this society is working, even in a way we find really problematic, should it be our, as the sort of outside force, our job to intervene?
Do we have a specific example of where the Gatewatch failed? Like, we're harping on this point, and I feel like that's because there's a specific example, maybe recently, maybe the last plane that we were on, where... So is there a specific example where the Gatewatch failed in this particular aspect that has us talking about this?
Oh boy, would I love
I
to
would say
delve
there
into
is, but
this.
We can spare a few moments on it, I think, because it's important.
Yeah, let's not go too deep, but let's talk about how Amonkhet, I think, is the one we're all talking about.
Yes.
It's kind of a world with a clear sort of references to Egyptian mythology. What do you guys think happens there in terms of the Gatewatch violating this idea of what we think they should have of a prime directive?
So to kind of start off, it's actually kind of funny because more or less in the story, one of the other Gatewatch members, Johnny, outright tells them, don't go to this plane because the big bad we're chasing, Nicobolus, it's his plane and he has control over it. And they go there and almost total party wipe no fewer than 3 times within the first story, and are literally saved by an act of God when Oketra, one of the 5 gods, saves them. Right. So they proceed to discover things about the culture, that there are trials that people undergo, and basically their lives are, they do the trials, you try to prove yourself worthy to the god pharaoh, who, spoiler, we are going to have spoilers here for the Amonkhet story if you have not read it, is Nicobolus.
Right.
And they eventually discover that not all is right on Amonkhet, because Gideon, one of the members of the Gatewatch, undergoes the trials because he wants to see himself bettered as a person and as a warrior. So, anyways, I will stop digging too deep into it, but more or less they find out that not everything's all right, behind closed doors. They find out that people are being sacrificed, or Thunderdome is literally happening, where the dead,
right.
Whoever is found worthy is then killed by the red god, Hazaret, and then they go to the afterlife. There's a whole thing there, but the whole point is that they're horrified to find out that people are dying and people are being sacrificed. And we would look at that, I'm fairly certain, and go, this bad, we need to fix. The Gatewatch go about doing that, and there was already a group of people on Amonkhet that were kind of raising eyebrows and going, something ain't right, all this math isn't adding up. And they end up encountering a new character, Samut, who is eventually found to be a planeswalker. She didn't know it, though, and she basically is inciting rebellion because, none of this adds up. Why are we fighting for the right to die? And it's this whole big story. But the big thing is that the Gatewatch then tries to intervene, and they do, and right about the time that things start going, in terms of revolution, Nicobolus shows up. Now, for context, Nicobolus is the equivalent of an endgame boss. He has 15 health bars, he has a spam AoE insta-death attack, anyway, and so on and so forth. Nicobolus is one of the proto-planeswalkers, one of the very first, and is one of the most powerful. And in the story, proceeds to opens a can of whoop and just beats all the Gatewatch fairly soundly, to the point that now in the story they are scattered. They all planeswalked away so that they didn't die, and Bolus just comes along and just mops them up. And then, but also, while this is all happening, the entire plane is more or less leveled. The people are dying, the cities are being destroyed, the protection that was put in place is now gone, and it's heartbreaking. And it's all because, granted, this is not to say that this wouldn't have kicked off when Bolus came back, because that was so foretold. But at the same time, you can't help but wonder, did we maybe speed this along? And
yeah, and I think that's really the key there, because it's just kind of connected to other stuff in our own world. Like in the activist world, one thing that gets talked a lot about these days is sort of white colonialism of activism, which is where like white people in America or Europe will look to a country that is having some real problems, and instead of trying to like work with the people on the ground to say, how is this problem like violating your values, and how can we help you build the system you want to see in your own country, it becomes the outsiders imposing their own values and their own wills, and often not even realizing that what they're doing is just going to make things worse for everybody.
Exactly.
And I think, to me, that's exactly what I see happening with the Gatewatch is, we eventually learn that even this system is more corrupt than it seems. But the Gatewatch originally, they don't know anything about the corruption. They just think, even if this system is exactly what it is, it involves human sacrifice and bad things, so it has to be wrong.
Right, and
Exactly.
I have a meta concern / complaint about this particular aspect of the story, and it's that, and it is just that they come in, they start imposing their will on this world, on this foreign culture, and then the story vindicates them by saying, yeah, Bolus messed with this plane a while
Yep.
ago, and things aren't right. You guys were right. You're vindicated in this way in your actions, and yes, the consequence of their actions is this desolation of the plane of Amonkhet, perhaps earlier than it would have happened otherwise. Although it seems pretty obvious that it was going to happen regardless, because Bolus was he was making
It's
a
nebulous.
factory. He was making a factory of stuff, and he decided he didn't need the stuff, so just nuke it and start over. Anyway, this idea that that they're interfering with this culture, and then the story effectively says, yep, they were correct to do that because this stuff was happening, and it was sort of a cart before the horse. They had found out beforehand, more definitively, that yes, this plane has been corrupted by something, and things aren't as they are supposed to be. Then I can get behind them deciding that they needed to fix it, right, to try to restore whatever old culture or help the people restore their. But just going in and saying this doesn't match with our ideals, so we're going to again impose our will, our belief system on these people because we don't agree with what's happening here. That just really bothered me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think because and this kind of feeds into what is another one of my concerns, is that it really plays up this idea that I think we often see in fiction that I think is really ethically problematic, which is this idea of people needing a savior. Because to me, by far the most interesting character in this world of Amonkhet that we just discussed, and the most interesting story is that character of Samut, the character who is in the world, who has lived in this context and is starting to see the problem for herself, and is starting to try and raise up those people herself. And I think what we often get in history, what we often get in our stories, both fictional and often even in the way we tell historical stories, is we don't talk about the public movements. We don't talk about the growing ranks of anger and discouragement and disillusionment among the people and how they all started to sort of work together. Instead, we get this great man of history idea of, one person comes along, often from the outside, and says, let me bring you all to freedom. And to me, that's exactly what this is. It's five great people of history, but they're attempting to save Amonkhet without even really trying to get to know Amonkhet or trying to get to know the people of Amonkhet.
And before we go on to a particular great man of history, I guess you could say, Lee, do you have any concluding thoughts on our concerns about the Gatewatch as an entity and their actions in the Magic story and how they're presented to us as the audience?
I did kind of touch on the big one, in that's that they kind of need a directive and they need to kind of not just step in and interfere. The big thing with that is that I feel like they were pseudo rewarded for intervening on Innistrad when all the shadiness was going on, and that kind of gave them this idea. I'd like to see them eventually develop into, obviously, like, we want to evolve into the best versions of ourselves, and it'd be nice to see them, go, look, we know awful things are happening, and we know that these things are terrible, but we can't interfere. That would be my biggest concern, and really the only concern I have with it. But I mean, the characters are written to be flawed for a reason. No one likes someone who's perfect. But that's my big main concern for the Gatewatch at this juncture.
And I would say that because I want us to dive into Jace specifically, but there's one other thing that really hits it for me, and this is probably my main concern, which is that and understand this, you have to kind of understand the larger context of Magic stories. It used to be that when we went to a plane, all of the stories were about the people on that world, told from the perspective of the people of that world. So it was all sort of internal to that world. What we now get is whatever new world we go to, we get it through the eyes of the characters of the Gatewatch. And I know this seems innocuous, but to me, I think it's a very important thing, and it's a really problematic thing in any kind of fiction, because what we're now doing is setting the Gatewatch as the normal. We're setting the Gatewatch as the kind of default, and instead of it being just a day in the life of a guy on Amonkhet, it is our characters going to Amonkhet and saying, "Oh, how strange and weird and exotic this is." And I'm not getting into theory here, but like there's this whole concept of the othering of different cultures, and that like particularly as white people, we often read about and talk about Asian or African or other cultures that seem different. And instead of ever just trying to experience those cultures in their own ways, we just read about them through our own eyes, and we make movies about a white character who goes to Asia instead of just telling a story based in Asia. And to me, I think that's my main problem with the Gatewatch. Is it's replicating this idea of telling a story through the eyes of people we know instead of telling the story through the eyes of the people in that own world.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it's something that we see in other forms of fiction as well. As you mentioned, things like Hollywood writes a movie or gives us a movie where it's somebody who's supposed to look like you or I, although that's a little bit tone deaf in American culture, given that you or I can be a variety of different races and ethnicities, etc., and cultural backgrounds. But they send a white dude over to some place to experience that culture, so we white dudes have a perspective character, because it's one thing that we really need. It's another person that looks like
Right.
us. But that idea in the Magic story, in the context of Magic story, is not so much about race as it is about people who come from radically different cultures, because they literally come from like different dimensions, these different planes of existence, and they're like Gideon came from a place with gods as well, and that's a whole other aspect to the story that we don't have the time to deep dive into. But he conflates the Amonkhet gods with his gods, and then like starts noticing differences. But like his initial reaction is what? Because he wasn't particularly fond of the Theros gods. Because to be perfectly honest, especially Heliod's kind of a jerk.
And that would be a fascinating story in and of itself, if we started by learning about the Amonkhet gods in their own context and in their own way. But it's that we only learn about the Amonkhet gods through the eyes of Gideon and how they're different from his own gods. And that's I think the idea that just is really problematic.
Whereas we got Heliod as Heliod. We know exactly what he's on about.
Yeah.
In Theros.
So with that, should we move on to the Grandmaster?
Absolutely.
Himself?
Let's move on to. So we're going to talk about one specific Gatewatch character, the one I already mentioned earlier, which is the character of Jace, and he's one of the first Planeswalker cards that Magic printed. That the game actually put out and said, here, you can actually play with these very powerful entities now. And since his inception, has been sort of an archetypal smart guy, right? In a lot of ways. There are some very positive aspects about Jace, and following our molding from before, I'd like to talk about what we like about Jace as a character first, before diving into our concerns about this particular character in the media that we are meant to digest as Magic players.
So I guess I'll take point on this. Jace is actually, he has... There's a lot of... The problem is that there's not, like... It's not like you can point to Gideon and go, here's what's good about Gideon. Gideon likes people. Gideon defends people. Gideon is self-sacrificing, so on and so forth. Jace is probably one of the more nuanced characters, in my opinion, because of his story. To kind of too long didn't read. He originally grew up and was found to be a telepath, and he was very confused and was even bullied for what he was doing, and he eventually found that he could mind control people. And this leads his parents to giving him a mentor in the Sphinx, Alhamret, I believe.
Correct, Alhamret.
Alhamret, just one of the Sphinxes on his plane. Long story short, if you can't see the obligatory double cross coming, you need to read more fiction. It is eventually discovered that Alhamret has been sending Jace on covert missions, but then erasing his memories, kind of sculpting his brain, as you will, his memories, to kind of be the perfect servant for him and his ambitions. So Jace then basically gets into a mind duel with him, and basically it blows out his memory, but he succeeds. So Jace then planeswalks to Ravnica, and Ravnica becomes his new home plane. Throughout Magic story, there have been a lot of things where Jace has been the one that has been followed, and for the most part, he is one of those people that he does well in the end. Yes, he does his investigation. Yes, he has his own quibbles about things. But in the end, Jace tries to do the right thing at almost every juncture. And this is all with the snark and wit that comes with him. And honestly, I feel like that is one of his more defined personality traits, is that he's the genius that we all knew in high school. He's I'm literally so smart that even talking to you is a chore. You are so beneath me, and that is one of the more personality traits that they tend to harp on, is this concept of I'm smarter than you. And to be fair, not that there's a fine line between overconfidence and just being confident in who you are. And no, for the most part, Jace really is that smart and that tactical.
Right.
But anyways, I don't want to get into too deep of a crunch on him, but one of the things about him that honestly I would argue is a good point is that he is a very nuanced character, but also that in the end he does right. The comparison I make, and please, Nathan Fillion, if you're listening to this, please forgive me, is he reminds me very heavily of Captain Mal from Firefly, but minus the charm.
Okay,
they're both.
I will admit, I was like, where are you going with this?
Minus double the charm, I would argue, but I think I see where you're going with this.
No. He's witty and fun, not funny. He's witty, or tries to be witty, but it's one of those, Captain Mal especially is one of those kind of conflicted but nuanced characters, but in the end ends up doing the right thing, as we see with, anyways, the Firefly episode can happen another time, but it's one of those that every time I would think of Jace, I was just like, this is the character I keep coming to. I mean, probably the better comparison is actually not Captain Mal, but hilariously enough, another one of Nathan Fillion's roles, which was Cade 6 from Destiny. Cade's a renegade. Cade kind of does what Cade wants. Cade has a gambling problem, so on and so forth. And he's got a lot of problems in and of himself, but does the right thing.
So, Lee, I would say two things. First of all, Jacob and I are constantly talking about how to generate more Facebook and Twitter interaction with our audience. I'm fairly certain we're going to get a number of people having very strong opinions about whether Jace is like Captain Reynolds.
Mal.
So I really want to thank you for that. And please, folks, if you agree with Lee, which
no one
I
will.
certainly want to hear from you, and if you disagree with Lee, let us know too. But I do see your point, though I'm not quite sure I'm with you, but I do see your point.
Hey, no, yeah, that's the point of discussion.
But no, for sure. And I just wanted to highlight, though, something you said earlier, which was when you were talking about how Jace is that geek, the hyper-intelligent, smartest kid in his class that we all knew in high school. And I think one of the things that is important, and I'm defending Jace here a little bit, which is, I know, shocking to many people who know me, because I'm pretty critical of his character, as I think we all are in some ways. In some ways, I don't think Jace is the stand-in for the geek we knew. I think that knowing the people who mostly play Magic and who read Magic, Jace is the geek that we were. I think that the idea is that a lot of the Magic player base, and I know certainly this was me, were the kids who were fairly smart in high school and were bullied because of it. And were often sort of, and I think this can be both a plus and a problem, but sticking just on the plus side, I do think, especially in that kind of YA fiction, there is value in having a real role model for the kid who's getting picked on because he's the smartest in his class or her class. I'm saying his because it's Jace, but certainly any person of any gender could relate to that.
Yeah.
Or one of them. They don't necessarily have to have that level of conceit. Uh,
Sure.
and this is one of the things about Jason. I think it is what actually pushes my buttons the wrong way, because
we're getting to the problems. Good.
Well. I mean, it's transitioning from something that I agree is positive in that it's a portrayal that is possibly necessary for the audience.
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, for me personally, where I struggle with it is that, not to sound conceited, I was a pretty smart guy in high school. I was not very well liked, and one thing that I came to realize much later in my life was that I was not aware of my own pretension or my own conceit at the time. And that actually was reflected in my behavior, which I also was not aware of. I wasn't aware that I was doing these things. And so when I look back at my behavior in high school, and then I look at some of Jace's actions in the story, I cringe at the similarities because I recognize that as an earlier part of myself that I now dislike. Because I wish I could go back and say, look, you don't need to be a jerk to these people, and I know you're not trying to be, but that's how it's coming across.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to envision the reality where you're a jerk, but I just currently cannot. No, and I completely...
It definitely existed, Lee.
Yeah. I complete 100% agree with you. I feel like Jace, and this is where... So, I completely agree with that assessment of Jace, if he's kind of the maybe not so better parts of our lives when we were originally starting out, and especially in high school, it's like, who wouldn't go back and redo high school? I mean, high school is just...
I wouldn't. It was awful. I'm not going to do that
again. Of regret and all sorts of awkwardness. But so the big rebuttal I have to that is, so it's good that you can identify, those are parts of me that I didn't like, and having my greatest hits of jerkery on display in the Magic story, it's just kind of like, and you're just cringing is good. But at the same time, one of the things that I feel they've been trying to do better with recently has been making Jace an actual flawed character and kind of showing him and knocking him down a few pegs. Because just a brief run over of this is, so Bolus hands it to him pretty hard and outright taunts him and just knocks him down several pegs when they fight. He basically almost kills Jace, and Jace goes away in an act of self-preservation despite wanting to stay and help. And then Jace planeswalks to Ixalan unknowingly. While on Ixalan, he kind of comes to terms with the fact that he's lost, that he doesn't know what he's doing, and that he doesn't necessarily always know best.
Well, I want to. Well, he doesn't. He doesn't. I don't want to deep dive onto that yet because
Fair enough.
Let's get into some of our other concerns. But I do want to talk about the development of his character on Ixalan, because there is a point in there that is missed. Well, anyway,
sure. But I just want to piggyback on, because I hear where you're going, Lee, and I do think they adjust for the character a little bit. But I think Jacob makes a great point about how we can look to our own behavior. But I think there's something even bigger there that I want to get into, which is that, to me, it's not just that Jace can remind us of, the silly things we did in high school and we grew out of, and so it's not a problem. It's that I think there is an element within our in our geek world, we are not the happy, idealistic world of board games and card games and video games that all of us kids who are teased in high school can now run to, and there's no problems. There are huge problems of misogyny, of elitism in the geek world, that is often driven by what we often refer to as kind of the geek entitlement idea of, I am so smart, I know best, and I don't have to listen to anybody else, and anyone who challenges me or critiques me, I am going to fiercely attack. And in our world, we see some of the worst trolling and harassment, especially online, especially of women who ever try to post different ideas of things like this. Now, I'm not by any means saying they all read about Jace and become like that. but I do think that in a context like that, in a context where we are so hard fighting against these ideas of I am smarter than you and you teased me when I was a kid, so now I get to have all, no, I should have all the power and things would be so much better if I ruled everything. I find a character like Jace deeply problematic. And he's not the first by any means. I mean, you can go all the way back to, kind of one of the grandfathers of science fiction and fantasy, Robert Heinlein. All of Heinlein's characters are characters who believe that they are smarter than everybody else and that they are better than everyone else. And if they just had the power, then everything would be okay. And I had those daydreams when I was a kid. I think a lot of us had those daydreams as a kid. I think, as Jacob said, a lot of us learned to realize that's actually not a very healthy way of thinking. And to me, the problem with Jace is all about that kind of thinking. And without really any attempt to say, whoa, wait a minute, this is not actually a healthy thing.
And then moving back, actually, because I'm going to bounce around a bit on this, I've decided, because one of the things, so it's good, in my opinion, to have characters with flaws in media. I think we can all agree on that, right? Matthew, you and I have talked about this at length, about how characters that are not, like, presented to us as paragons are more interesting, right? And so these are things that we see in Jace that we're like, that's a problem to me. But that is a real person, right? There are people that are like that. So it in some ways is a good thing by the Magic Story creators that they've presented us this character. Where my concern lie is that the Magic Story is self-aware enough to realize that these are flaws, and it's presented in such a way that the reader can take it as, okay, this part of Jace is good and being celebrated, and this part of this character, not so much. This part of this character is something that we shouldn't like. Which
I think Jace would be a great antagonist. Jace would be a great anti-hero.
He has been an antagonist in the story in some ways.
Yeah, I almost kind of agree with Matthew, though, that I think he would work better as kind of an anti-hero, because he's there. He is working towards his own means, but at the same time, he's not, on the, oh, we're gonna have a bonfire and the wood is, like, women and children. He's not megalomaniac, finger tent, going, yes,
He's
die.
not actually a villain, right?
No,
there's no mustache twirling, to use our favorite phrase for that kind of thing.
Yes. Such a great phrase. But no, I think Jace is actually a very interesting character, and especially if we kind of break down his story and analyze it a little bit, Jace has been through some crap.
Oh yeah.
Not to use some foul language, but Jace has been through it. And my, just a little bit of context and background, my undergraduate was in psychology, and that has definitely opened my eyes to a lot of things and seeing kind of like what precedes certain behaviors. And Matthew, I actually want to thank you, because there was a phrase you used at one point on, I think it was the, what about hero? It was the, what happens when a hero fails? It was the phrase, hurt people hurt people. Mm-hmm. And I heard that and I'm like, oh my gosh, that is dead on. And Jace, has been through mind destruction no fewer than 2 or 3 times. He's had to deal with the constant repercussions of just being a planeswalker, and not that it's so hard having all this intelligence, but
power.
In power, he has definitely made it come across that, like, this isn't easy, and even for someone of him and his hubris, he's had a lot of problems kind of coming to terms with his power, and still, even as an adult, is struggling to kind of find that identity. Maybe he is an anti-hero. Maybe he is the hero that we all eventually develop into. Not as ridiculous as Gideon in his gung-ho, making sure the world is protected, and the only way to do that is big muscles and abs, Jace is kind of...
I think that is a very reductionist portrayal of the Gideon character, but I'm going to let it stand because we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, but so, like, I think Jace, to kind of close, Jace is a very flawed character, and he has definitely been a victim of a lot of circumstance that has just been awful.
And I'm really glad you brought that up, because that transitions into my primary concern with the character of Jace. Set aside all the stuff that reminds me of... So set aside all the stuff that reminds me of, things I'm less proud of from earlier in my past. Throw that away. That's not my biggest concern with the character of Jace. I agree that Jace has demonstrably been... He's seen some shit, right? He's seen some things. But to use the word you were avoiding... But the thing that bothers me is that he gets amnesia the way you or I get Chinese takeout. And it's self-imposed, right? He edits his own memory, like, not infrequently. And yes, this is him flexing his power, right? It's flexing his muscles. But sometimes he does it for things that he'd rather not deal with, right? And that's phenomenally unhealthy. And as somebody who's studied some psychology, I'm sure you would agree, Lee, that is very unhealthy to take problematic experiences and, like, throw them away. Like, yes, it's a very powerful and an empowering idea that you can just get rid of them, but here's the thought: maybe you could just learn from it instead, and then his behavior would make more sense to me if he was carrying all of this. But he gets rid of a lot of it.
That's honestly one of the bigger points in the Judge program, as well as just real life, is it is generally more healthy to learn from things and accept your own failures than to just auto-wipe and go, nope, everything I did was perfect, and I'm not gonna think of it any other way. Like, I'm actually not inclined to disagree with that, just on who I am.
Yeah.
So, I think... I guess in closing with Jace specifically, is... my biggest problem has not been the character of Jace, but more how he's been written. Much like Jessica Rabbit, I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way.
Right.
It's that concept that Jace is on a... I feel like Jace is on a longer path than than a lot of the other Planeswalkers. He has a lot more room for meat and depth and development than Gideon, who's kind of already convinced of who he is. Chandra, who has kind of learned to tame that fire in her, but also let it out at times. Nissa, I also feel, is going to be one of the more interesting characters in the goings on, as well as, all those other tertiary characters. But I think Jace is on a road, and I think what Wizards is doing with him right now is slowly getting better. I feel like he is, because he learns a lot on Ixalan, and has kind of learned... I mean, spoiler alert, he literally makes friends with someone who he had a fight with,
yes,
probably a year or two ago.
But that was after he got a complete
learning.
Brain dump. He doesn't know who he is. The person he fought with has to tell him that. So that cheapens it a little bit in my mind. But what we're going to see, actually, as the story comes, because he's just gotten all of his memories back, I'm really excited about it. But, like, to see what happens, how he reconciles those two things. Because I got to tell you, Lee, and I know we've talked about this, and I don't really like the character of Jace. I loved Ixalan Jace so far. He's so earnest.
Yes, exactly.
He's everything I like to be.
Here's the two things I would add to that. One is that I am finding I like Ixalan Jace a lot more, but I find it really hard because I sort of feel like in some ways
all fall apart.
Well, it's not that we could all fall apart. It's that we're getting this entirely new character because he had a sort of like install new mind software, start again. And I feel like it's actually really unfair to these other characters who he did really bad things to in earlier stories, and they're forced to just say, well, he's this different character, let's start again.
Well, we'll see.
Yes, we're going to see how that works out.
We'll see if the chickens come home to roost.
Yes.
Here's the other part of it for me, and I accept that I might be in the minority here among the three of us. You guys were talking about him being this really interesting character, and I think that's where I just don't see it, because more than anything, I am just so bored of this kind of character. I feel like we get this hyper-intelligent, smarter than his own good, gets picked on, but really everyone should be listening to him, and eventually he gets to save the day. We get that story in science fiction and fantasy so often, again and again and again. And I just, every time I hear Wizards going back to the Jace well, I just think, why are you guys being so lazy? There are so many more interesting stories you could tell, particularly ones that are not so problematic. To me, the Jace story, it's just, it's that white male entitlement story we get again and again and again. And in a world where there are so many other interesting kind of beings and races and types of things you could get, I I I, I just I can imagine that we can get a redemption of this character, but it just seems like such a waste of story time instead of just saying, okay, we had this character, he was smart, he had some flaws, let's now move on to something else.
Well, so I guess. Sorry, go ahead, Jacob.
I was just gonna ask if your main dislike of Jace is actually that he triggers your Wesley Crusher trauma, because that's what it sounds like to me.
For me, it's not my Wesley Crusher trauma, it's my Ready Player One
Oh
trauma.
yeah,
I know that's a whole story you and I are going to have at a different time. It's kind of what I was saying before. I think if we didn't live in a world where I was seeing entitled geek boys do so much harm in so many real ways, I'd probably be a little more sympathetic to this character. But I feel like at this moment in the sort of cultural zeitgeist, we have had too many of these characters, and I'm really ready for something.
You think he's the character that the Magic player wants, but not the character the Magic player needs.
Exactly.
I'm full of cliches
say
tonight.
He's Batman, like. So I think I can identify a little bit with that. I am a person that I hate unresolved story arcs, which is exactly why I hated Lost.
Right.
Lost was just a quagmire, but I want to see Jace get some kind of resolution, at least for now. And I agree that we could probably table him for a little bit. Because, I'm going to be honest, my big thing that I want to see happen, I want to see Tamio Narset God Squad go, complete awesome on a plane. Because Narset and Tamio know each other in the story, and Narset has been a character that I've wanted clarification on and just been like, yo, what's going on with this? Because she's a very interesting character for a lot of reasons.
And a great example of diversity in the Magic story, too, with Narset.
Right.
Even look at it. Like, Narset, at the very base, is, we would say, of Asian descent.
Right.
Am I incorrect in saying that? Okay. So we have that going for
some
her.
kind of Southeast Asia thing, yes.
Yeah, yes, sorry. Something like that. But the other, more subtle thing with her is that very early on in her kind of her new arc story, not the former arc story, it involves time travel, just go with it, is that she is shown to be neuroatypical.
Mm-hmm.
Or
that's what I was referring to by diversity, because that was, to me, just incredible that we got one of those characters.
It was fan-freaking-tastic.
Yeah.
I loved reading it and going, this is an actual, compelling character with flaws,
yep.
and, just is trying to understand the world around them, and it was great. I loved it. So I can agree to the point of, I do think they could stand to spend slightly less time on Jace. I do want to see him develop as a character, because I'm going to be honest, I'm rooting for the guy at this point. I'm one of those people that believes in others getting better and, not just being shadows of their former selves and, constantly staying in just constant motion in the same place. I want to see him get his ending, and I want it to be at least somewhat decent. I'm going to be honest, I don't like these people that just go outright and attack Jace and say he's shitty and awful and this and that. It's like, that seems like you're just kind of writing it off a little too. And that's not to say you guys are those people. You guys have been
I absolutely am that person, though.
Well, no.
But yeah,
Matthew's torches and pitchforks over Jace.
No. But, you've given him his day in court, and you haven't made anything that isn't able to be backed up. But these people that are just like, oh, Jace is the most printed planeswalker, and it's like, up until Ixalan, he wasn't. And, they always touch on Jace. I'm like, well, they've also been touching on the planes, the Gatewatch. So yes, Jace is part of that. So I agree. We could stand a step away, but I'm sorry, I'm never a person who likes people who just outright hate something and can't provide reasoning for it. So that's the exact inverse of the problem I have with you, Matthew.
Right. Where he's providing reasoning and you're like, you got a point.
And I think this is a great discussion, because we don't have to agree.
Correct.
And I think that's and I like that we have different perspectives. I just want to sort of say in closing, and then we should start wrapping up. But for my last word, and then anyone else can throw in their last word, I will say that it made me a little bit happy, because in that story we've referenced a couple times, Nicol Bolas, when he's destroying the Gatewatch and he's beating up on each one of these characters. I'll admit I wanted Jace to die in that scene. I was disappointed he'd just flat out die. That ended his story. But what I loved was that Nicol Bolas says a couple of times to the Planeswalkers things like, "I am so bored with your antics," and like, "Jace, you really think you can outthink this? You're not the smartest in the room." I mean, it wasn't just that it was satisfying to me as a character. It's that I felt like there was one person in the writer's room who at least sort of understood the reason why not all, but some of the fans are really tired of these characters. And it felt like there was someone in the writer's room trying to throw a bone of saying, we are going to keep telling the stories of these characters, but you guys who are not just like bored of these characters, but really think they're problems, we get that, and we're having Nicol Bolas at least be your voice for a little bit of one story.
Here is your obligatory punch-up of the characters. Here is all of the things that you have written about going you wish you could do. Here is Nicol Bolas doing all of those for like 5 minutes. All right, we're going to go back to the actual story now.
Well, and so my hope with this is that what we get as an outcome of the events of Hour of Devastation, where Nicol Bolas lays the proverbial smackdown, and the literal smackdown on the Gatewatch, is this development of each of the members of the Gatewatch. They just had a major experience in their lives, and they should grow from it. And it gives me hope that what the Ixalan story did with Jace was present to us a completely new Jace. And I do think that it is interesting that the only way the writers felt they could do that was to literally format C:\Jace in order to do that. But we get a completely fresh take on him. He experiences a new plane with wide, effectively innocent eyes. And what I'm hoping is that when he gets the sum total of his experiences back, he uses these new experiences and goes, "Wait a minute, I think I was better when I was just using my experiences in the environment to help form myself." And then he grows, and the character grows, and that we see this happening with other members of the Gatewatch who sort of come into a more evolved, if you will, version of themselves, a more mature version of themselves, so that when you get back together, they can have their little powwow and maybe stand in a circle and do an Alcoholic Anonymous thing, saying like, "Yes, I was a misunderstood planeswalker. I understand better now." Maybe not quite that hackneyed, but but I would really like it if they would grow. Because I agree with you, Lee, that the most boring characters we get are the ones that start the story in a particular fashion and don't ever really change in any meaningful way by the end of it.
So the comparison I have for that is, there is a internet video game reviewer who I was shown in college and still to this day kind of watch. It's Yahtzee Croshaw of Zero Punctuation.
Yep.
One of the points he makes is he doesn't mind shooters. However, he does regularly talk about how the arcs in a lot of them are basically you start off as a meathead in power armor, and then you end the game as a meathead in power armor, only meathead in power armor, but with a slightly gravelier voice. And it's one of those, it's exactly that. It's, we start as a meathead, we end up as a meathead, but we've been through something, but we haven't learned.
And I think that's a great point. And I would just say, Jacob, to what you were saying, and this is kind of going back to our first point, I would be interested in seeing each of these characters go through some of that growth. And also, I think it would be a lot better even if we keep these 5 characters as main characters, to have them not be the Gatewatch means that we are going to get to learn so much more about these other cultures.
Yeah.
Because now, not only, we just don't have as much time of the 5 of them talking to each other, we have each of them talking to the people in the new worlds they're experiencing, but also they never have the chance to say, "Oh, wasn't that thing on this plane so weird," to someone else who's also new to the plane. Everyone else they're experiencing is going to be from that plane. And I do think that at least is going to really address this issue of always seeing these other places as new and different and exotic.
Yeah. And
just getting to see the story of whatever plane we go to in its own light.
Yes. And we are getting that with the story of Ixalan. So there is less of that people interfering with the Gatewatch interfering with the plane because only one member is there, and more of this like here's this really interesting rich world, and it's sort of just presented for our purview for us to look at, and I'm hoping that that's the direction these stories take, that it's less colonialist, less imperialistic, and more, our characters are heroes when they do form up as Gatewatch again and form MTG Voltron, that it's against another extraplanar menace like the Eldrazi, like Bolas, like the Phyrexians, which are another. They're another entity. They're basically the Borg. They are. They're literally the Borg.
Not disagreeing.
We need to wrap up, so let's not open a whole can of worms here.
But I guess so closing thoughts, and I'll start because I said the word closing thoughts. The Magic story, the Gatewatch in particular, we talked about this idea that they need a prime directive, and I think that's so important. I think it's important that when we are digesting these media, even if we enjoy them, even if we enjoy the story, we still call out the aspects that we think are problems. That we say, this was really interesting. Maybe you shouldn't glorify, or maybe you shouldn't validate these characters interfering with this pre-established culture in this way, because there are ideas that you could take away from that are unhealthy, that we have already identified as a culture are problems. So I hope that what we see going forward in the MTG story is a little more self-awareness in the Magic story, in what we are presented, and that we are presented as external observers, and maybe get a bit of that criticism in the narrative.
Good point. What about you, Lee? Closing thoughts?
Closing thoughts. Gatewatch needs prime directive. Jace, I like what you're doing. You've been a jerk in the past, but you're getting better. Please keep doing that. Also, please go through other actual story arcs instead of just the core characters. That's my thoughts.
Yeah. Are you thinking that Jace and Vraska might end up being an OTP? He does seem to like black magic planeswalkers. He has a type.
I am not able to comment on that at this time because there is a member of my household that I don't know her current stance on that, and I will follow up and
I think they
be told what my opinion is.
I think they are adorable.
Hey, to me, a story, if Vraska accidentally turns him to stone in a moment of passion, I am so anyway,
so
putting aside my own, as I said, yes, I have pretty strong feelings about Jace, but I think it's to me, and I hear where you guys are coming from. I get that we're getting better. To me, though, it's not just about him being a bad character. It's that I think he's a harmful character. It's that I think he is a character who perpetuates stereotypes that are really dangerous in our geek world. And so that's where I am so concerned about it. Now I know I'm very sensitive about it, and he is getting a lot better. And that's, I think, something that we can really have some hope for. And also to say, I think that's the most interesting thing in closing to say is that this is a podcast that was created. We originally had this idea to do the podcast before this whole new Ixalan storyline came out. And so I think it's interesting that a lot of us have kind of shifted pretty drastically from where we were when we were talking about starting this podcast to begin with. And that's just an interesting way of seeing how these ideas are constantly changing, constantly growing. So what about for you all? For you Magic players and fans, do you agree with us? Or obviously we didn't all agree with each other. Where do you fall on the Gatewatch? Where do you fall on Jace or some of the other Planeswalkers? Are there things we missed? Great things about any of these characters, terrible things about any of these characters you want to hear us get into? For those of you who don't know the Gatewatch but have stuck through it, first of all, thank you for bearing with us as our deep dive into our own particular favorite kind of geekery here. But where do you hear echoes of these stories in your other stories, in Heinlein or in other things, or in Star Trek, or on other stories you love? Where have you seen times where these kind of hero team-ups have been really great stories, or times where you've seen other worlds that need a prime directive? Where have you seen the troubled geek boy be a powerful story, or where have you seen it be troubling? Let us know. You can find us on Facebook or on Twitter. And I don't forget, if you think Malcolm Reynolds is Jace Beleren, definitely tell us. And if you don't, please let us know.
We should come up with clever hashtags for that. Like hashtag
yes.
Jace Reynolds and hashtag never Jace Reynolds.
Yes.
I can get behind this.
Follow those two. Hashtag, and Jace is Jace. Hashtag Jace Reynolds or hashtag.
I think if you need to know how to spell Jace, you probably aren't qualified to comment on whether or not he's Malcolm Reynolds.
Oh, come on. Didn't we say that the whole point is anyone can comment on anything?
Okay, fair. You got me.
No, but as Lee said, we actually should know that. But again, for anyone who, whatever just ideas this has brought up for you, let us know. You can use those two hashtags. You can find us on Facebook or on Twitter at Superhero Ethics. Please tell other people about this podcast. Share it with people who you think would be interested in the conversation. More than anything, I think all three of us, Lee, I got to know you because we were playing a game of Magic and we got into great conversations about this. And I think all of us love these conversations and we want to have it with more of you guys, the listeners. So please tweet at us. Please Facebook us. You can email us. And more than anything, please keep listening. Please keep thinking about these stories for yourselves. So on behalf of myself, Jacob, and Lee, thank you guys all for listening. Have a great day.
So Matthew, I think it is possible for somebody to misconstrue a point you made earlier because what I think you might have said is that you would like Jace better if he were stoned. Is that what you meant?
No, I think I said I'd like him better if he was turned to stone.
Yeah, so he's stoned, right?